first revenues, and then you get to scale up, which has maybe got like £1 million, £2 million revenue. And actually what stops a company getting from startup to scale up is not usually the founder base. At this point, it's still probably very founder-centric. You know, the founder can control a lot and should control a lot, because nobody's going to care as much about the business as the founder. So actually, from startup to scale up, the founder, if they're good, then they should be able to do that. The actual problem comes next for me, and maybe this is what you're more referring to, which is where you get to like £1-2 million worth of revenue, and now you're trying to get to £10 million worth of revenue. Now the founder has a problem, because the founder can't control everything anymore. Even if they want to control everything, it's really, really hard to, and they're not going to have the expertise to. And so they then have to start to put in trusted lieutenants. So you're going to go from a bookkeeper that helps you do the books to actually probably getting a CFO in. You're going to go from outsourcing your technology development to getting a chief technology officer in.
Edward, you're very welcome to the ScaleX Insider podcast. I am delighted and thrilled to have you on the show today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's a massive, massive privilege and an honour to have been asked to talk. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, likewise. Well, look, you're very welcome. And as we've just found out, you have Irish roots as well, which is always a good thing, always a plus on this show. So well done on that. Look, we've been chatting off air. You know, our vision is to inspire, connect, and enable millions of ambitious leaders of small and medium-sized enterprises to scale with purpose. Edward, I open up the show with this question to all of our guests. What does scaling with purpose mean to you?
I think it's a fantastic question, and it's one I've struggled with in my own mind. You know, it's like, where does the line cross between being successful in the right way and being successful in a way that then damages other people? And I can see companies battling with that all the time. I think that for me, and maybe because I've been raised in an organization like Octopus, which has a strong culture of doing the kind of trying to do the right thing. I think the trouble with going forward in a way that doesn't have purpose, that doesn't have a real mission, that doesn't try and do things in the right way, and just tries to get the next buck and tries to exploit other people, is that you lose the foundations of what you're trying to build. And okay, you might in the short term succeed, but in the long term, you're going to find it much harder. So to me, it's building with purpose means having a real mission that you believe in and the founders believe in, and then acting with integrity in order to achieve that mission without having to tread on other people. You know, because ultimately life's too short, and so who wants to build something purely for money? I think you're gonna be on a very miserable very quickly if that's kind of your attitude to it.
Yeah, it's so profound. We always say vision without purpose becomes a distracting illusion. At some point, you will find out the hollowness of that, and your response to that question really speaks to that. So you've had a really, really interesting career, from Rolls-Royce to the heady world of investing. So for those listening who don't know who Edward Keelan is, can you give us a little bit of your journey, Edward? How do you go from being in a large corporate to entrepreneurial investing, to investing in startups? You've done a full 180 there. So share with us a little bit of insight as to how you made that decision, and I suppose what insights now you have around entrepreneurialism, which your partnership in Octopus Ventures has given you.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, that's a huge question. I mean, I'm going to fill this out. If you, I warn you now.
This is a podcast in its own.
I'm going to fill you this entire hour just on that question alone, if you're not careful. I mean, there's nothing better than talking about yourself, is there? So, and my journey. Yeah, so I had a really weird background for a number of reasons, but in some ways it was very typical, but in other ways it was very different. So my background, both my parents were entrepreneurs. So my dad was entrepreneur from the moment he'd left his university, and my mum became an entrepreneur a bit later, and they were both running different types of business. My mum was running a kind of, none of the family actually rode horses, but for some reason we sold jodhpurs. That's a story in itself. So you can imagine this kind of like not particularly well-to-do family, kind of just normal working class. But in the garage, we had tons of jodhpurs, and my mum used to sell jodhpurs and all this. She was into clothing manufacturing. It's a whole another story. And my dad he was into clothing manufacturing. He ran various factories up in Sheffield, making Levi jeans and things like that, and then latterly into more of a kind of wealth management industry. So entrepreneurship was just around me all of the time. And I couldn't really understand why people wouldn't want to be entrepreneurs. To me, I was like, isn't entrepreneurship the coolest thing? You get to control it, you get to create something. And, when I speak to entrepreneurs now, and I just love this whole idea that you start with a kind of napkin or a beer mat, and it's two people, or maybe it's just on your own or whatever, but like, a couple of people having a coffee, talking about why don't we start this company? Why don't we name it like this? And, that starts on a napkin or starts in the pub. And then you start to try and do the idea. You get your first customer, and then you employ people. And then before you know it, you've got tens of employees and hundreds of employees. And I just think, isn't that amazing? Like, isn't that kind of like cool? You go from an ideation stage to this organism that's kind of this almost living and breathing organism that's influencing all these people and influencing all the people around them. And how much impact it's had. I mean, like Octopus Energy we've got here, I mean, that's a conversation between Simon Rogerson and Greg Jackson, who's kind of founder, and then Octopus backed at Octopus Energy. They just started having chats over coffee, and now look, it's the largest energy supplier in the UK, and basically transforming the way in which we consume energy. I just think that whole thing is amazing. I can't think of any other real industry or way of working that can have such adventure, discovery, emotion, and all of that. So I just loved entrepreneurship completely. And then, but at the same time, my parents were entrepreneurs. I kind of wanted to go through education. Looking back, I'm not entirely sure why, but I did. And then I thought, I need to get a job, and I want to get a proper job. I want to try. All I'd known was entrepreneurship. So like most people, all they know is their parents have a job and their parents get paid. I was like the opposite. All I knew was like this kind of crazy world of entrepreneurship where my parents were either in feast or famine. It was either going great or not. The roller coaster. And so I thought I'll get a proper job and I'll do that. And I went and got a job at Rolls-Royce. And I always feel a little bit bad about this because I've still got friends that work at Rolls-Royce. And for many people, it's a wonderful company. For me, I managed 9 months. And it was kind of, all I remember is kind of just very grey. Everything was very grey all the time. And, I just remember there's a lot of people that I didn't know what they did. They just seemed to turn up to work and kind of get paid. That whole entrepreneurial spirit just really didn't feel like it was there. And then the actual one of the killers for me was like, there was an email that went around saying that not even the CEO of the whole of Rolls-Royce, but like the managing director of the division I was working in was going to come round on Wednesday, and please could everyone make sure that they had their tie on because he'd be coming round on a Wednesday. And I was just thinking, that I can't work in an organization. Like if it was my organization, I'd be walking the floor every day. I want to know what's going on. I'd be talking to people. I'd be trying to find out who's good, who's not. And yet we get this. I just thought, wow, this is so far away. If you compare that to, just to compare that to Octopus now, if you ever walk into, and hopefully one day you will, walk into the Octopus offices here at 33 Holborn, and you see a kind of a guy that sat on the table next to reception, and that's Simon Rogerson. That's the CEO of the whole organization, the guy that built the whole thing, because he wants to know what's going on. He says, if I sit here, people come and talk to me, and I can kind of get the pace of them. Like, that's what I want. That's what I want from my founder, from my entrepreneur, from a leader, somebody that's kind of in the trenches with you. And so quite quickly, I realized, you know what, I'm never going to be a big corporate person. I don't know. My mum always jokes. She said, "Can you imagine the pension you'd have now had you stayed at Rolls-Royce?" And she's got, it's probably true. So it just wasn't for me. And I had the opportunity to be the first employee in a startup and go on that sort of entrepreneurial journey. And so I took it.
Yeah, I love that. I love your passion, your value for authenticity. Your value for that kind of roll the sleeves up and get in the trenches, being together as one team. I have to say I'm an investor in Rolls-Royce. So whatever they've done in
I've
post
shot myself in the foot there, haven't you? Keep your shares.
yeah, I wish I'd bought more shares, but I was just looking this morning before you were coming on. They've increased by 500% since I first held them.
Jeez, I don't think I've ever invested anything that increased by 100%. I knew I should have stayed there.
So that's just to, suppose, add to your mum's advice about the pension. If you also were gifted shares, there you go. But yeah, they're just an incredible corporate, synonymous with certainly synonymous with Great Britain and you know, they have an incredible scale up story. What I want to do is get back into kind of your understanding of what's going on in the startup world, because access to finance is cited as the single greatest impediment as to why SMEs really are challenged to scale, yet there's never been as many venture capital firms or private equity firms in the marketplace with money ready to invest. Why do you think SMEs are challenged in finding capital to support their growth?
I could be a little bit contrarian here.
Go for it.
And say, to be honest, I know that the statistic gets rolled out, but I don't see it really. If you're a good business that's got a good idea and that you're making traction, you're making waves, then you shouldn't struggle to get funding. Is kind of what I think. So, if the answer is, and are you allowed to swear on your podcast, by the way? I don't even know if you're allowed to swear.
You absolutely can, if that's
okay.
if you want to make the point, Edward.
I
go
try
for
not
it.
to. But yeah, I mean, if the question is why do loads of shit businesses not get funding, it's because they're not very good. And I don't mean to be mean about it. I would like to see the business that haven't got funding and the reasons why, because there is funding out there. Now that isn't the case for every business. Of course, there are good businesses that don't get funded that somehow get missed, but you know, we have a first check fund at Octopus that's making, you know, right down to £100,000 checks into this sort of ideation stage of companies. So there is definitely funding out there if you get it right, but you need to probably take advice. You need to, you need to work hard to get traction. You need to be scrappy. And I would I'd also note that, you know, the UK has some of the most generous tax schemes for startups going. So if you've got things like the Seed Enterprise Investment Scheme, where, you know, if you can convince somebody to invest £10,000 into your startup, they get £5,000 of that back in tax relief plus tax-free growth plus. So I think some of these broad, you know, it should be hard to get funding for a startup. You shouldn't just be able to go, right, I want to get funding for my startup, you know, and have an idea. It should be difficult because most businesses fail. Like 90+% of all businesses will fail. And therefore, it should be difficult to find financing because that financing is or to get it because that financing is risky. You know, for more traditional businesses, you've got things like the Virgin Startup Loans. For innovative businesses, we've got Innovation UK. You know, and I would wonder how hard and scrappy people really are to actually go and find that money. And I would, and I might be a bit mean and say, look, if you can't find that money, it might just be because your business idea isn't very good. Because the world is full of really bad business ideas. I've gone through a journey over the years, and now I tend to be pretty brutal with people when they pitch their new idea to me and just say, like, if I think it's going to work, I'll get excited. And if I don't think it's worked, then I'll be honest about it. And I don't think there's enough of that. I think there's too much kind of people saying every business is a good idea. And I think there's a big lack of education in terms of how businesses operate, you know, how P&Ls operate, how balance sheets operate, how cash flows work. You know, I'm amazed that you get, you know, PhDs coming out of universities trying to build businesses with no idea about how to properly forecast cash flows and profit and loss and all this. It's like, well, how do you expect to get financing when you don't understand the building blocks of businesses? So there's lots of reasons, but I would argue, I think a bigger thing that I would probably be concerned with is the amount of funding that goes to people that are less socially mobile. So I think you've got especially in the tech world, you have a big divide between people that are from wealthy backgrounds who can raise money from individuals. Like I nonchalantly said there, like, oh, you could raise £10,000 and you get well, for most people, £10,000 is a huge amount of money, and therefore, unless you're from a fairly wealthy background, then you're not going to be able to just call your mates up and get them to put in £10,000. So I get that, and I think that if that statistic is more worrying, is the amount of early stage funding that goes into founders from an early stage that come from wealthy backgrounds, and that's why things like State School Ventures and others as well are really trying to address that problem, because I think there needs to be an equalization of that.
I want to come back to there's a huge amount in that alone. You mentioned right at the outset a good business with a good idea shouldn't be challenged with actually getting support, finance support. But the expectation should be that this is hard. There's a lot of businesses out there. There's a lot of people with ideas rather competing for money. But you have to be a good business with a good idea. Can you drill into that a little bit more, Edward? Like, how do you now discern what is a good business and what is a good idea? What are some of your non-negotiables if people are pitching?
Depends what version of me they're pitching to, I guess, and what for. So if it's if it was an angel investment, so I do a little bit of angel investing, but not much, because it kind of conflicts with my day job. But if it was that, then I only invest as an angel into things that I care about. So, for example, I've just invested into Talamo, which is a dyslexic screening tool for children, and it's a problem that I encounter and have lived, and one where I think there is, the founder is exceptional, really exceptional founder, and I think there's a big opportunity there to change the way in which we think about the ways different children learn. So that's something that's the real purpose behind that and the vision that I'm backing. Whereas in my day job, so separate that from my day job, lots of stuff comes into that. Clearly, every VC which says the founder is everything. The founder. Well, again, slightly contrarian. I do believe the founder is everything, and definitely time is told. But I think it's a broad church of founders that are acceptable, and I personally have this problem with trying to judge other people, especially in short order. It just doesn't feel quite right to me. I've seen like VCs going to me, I met that person, I didn't think that they were this or that, and I'm just like, I don't know, who are you to judge that person on one meeting? They weren't rude to you, they weren't, whatever. And actually, some of the best founders were quite introverted and maybe didn't have that kind of atypical founder Hollywood style. But clearly that is important, and probably for me it's most important because for two reasons. Firstly is, do I think they can sell their vision internally and externally? So if they can't explain it to me, it's unlikely they're going to be able to explain it to other people. So that sounds a bit arrogant, but I feel like I've seen enough businesses and I hundreds and hundreds of businesses that I know if I understand something quickly or not. And if I can't understand it quickly and it can't be explained, then they're never going to be able to sell it to other people. And I've made some of my worst investment mistakes when I haven't understood what the proposition is, and then thought, oh, well, they're clever. They're cleverer than me, so I'm sure they understand it.
Let me just pick up on that for a moment, Edward, because you have deep knowledge, obviously, of the technology B2B space. But when you say they should be able to explain their vision so that you can understand it, and you're a little bit self-deprecating there in terms of, well, that sounds arrogant or whatever. But do you mean by that they should, their sister should be able to understand this, their auntie should be able to, their granny should be able to, or is it a case of no, in something that requires that's deeply technical, then you've got to go and pitch this to somebody who's also deeply technical? But what do you specifically mean about being able to sell your vision? Is that to anyone?
For me, yes, but I'm not a deep tech investor. And I'm not a biotech investor. So if I was a deep tech investor or a biotech investor, maybe that changes to some degree. You need to have this expectation of knowledge. But my very good friend of mine is head of chemistry at Vertex UK, which is one of the UK's largest pharmaceutical companies. And I'll tell you what, he can explain anything to anybody, no matter however complicated it is. And so I think about my mate Pete and the way that he explains things. I'm like, well, you should be able to do this. But also, I think what happens when people can't explain things is that they start to talk around the problem in depth. So what they do is they say, what our solution does is it solves climate change, or it solves food hunger, and blah blah. And just like these big things, and then they go on and talk about those sorts of things in a very generic, open concept, and maybe getting technical. And you're like, okay, but that's the entire problem. Like, but what part of the problem are you solving for? And even if you've got the most complicated thing, you should be able to say, this is the problem. Here is the problem, and this is our solution. And that's it. The problem is, I don't know, that people need quicker access to this type of data. Our solution gives you quicker access to that type of data. Okay, well, now I understand the problem, the solution. And then the next thing is obviously, what's the size of that problem? I feel bad about this, but a common one that I cite is a company that came to me and said, we solve food hunger, food waste. The food waste, massive problem, we solve food waste. And I was like, how do you do that? It's like, okay, and the size of the food waste problem is $1 trillion or whatever. It's like, okay, well, that's the food waste problem. But what does your product do? Okay, well, we're an app that we give to supermarkets. I'm like, okay, well, how many supermarkets are there? There's 10. So how much do you sell it for? It's like £100,000. So, but with that, the total of your market is, maybe £1 million. It's, it's not a trillion. It's not the food waste problem. It's that. It's £1 million. It's £1 million. And so you have to also not get fixated on the big macro problem and really understand what you're solving for. And if that opportunity isn't big enough to grow into, then it's not a sort of a VC backable business.
Yeah, I want to recap there because, okay, we've got the founder, and you've met many founders, and they range from the widely extroverted to the reclusively introverted and everything in between, I can imagine. Is there something there, just before we move on, is there something that you can identify fairly quickly in a conversation with a founder, whether this is somebody you're likely to back or not? Or is that just time spent with this person?
Yeah, time spent with them. So I said there was two things. One was the ability to inspire others to understand what they do externally, internally. The other one is, do I want to work with this person for the next 5 years? Because they might be the best founder in the world, but life's too short to have to deal with idiots every day, or metaphoric. Choose my language more carefully, but you know what I mean. There's I just can't be bothered. If truth be told, and we have we have sort of test that it's like if somebody comes in and they're rude to the receptionist, or they don't take their cup back, or they don't just being a nice person, basically. If you get the feeling there's a sort of arrogance to them, or then you know what, they're not going to be. I like the idea of we're putting our investors' money, and our investors are individuals. It's not institutional. But even institutional money, people say it's institutional money, but institutional money is individuals that have put the money into the institution that then gets invested. So you're investing individuals' money somewhere down the line. And I like the thought that the company should be a good custodian of that money, and they should have a respect for it. And I've backed founders I shouldn't have done, where you just can tell they have no respect for the money that you've invested, even though that money is just individual people that have their hard-earned money they've put to it. And so that's something else I want to see in the founder is like, and what does having respect mean? I mean, it's being transparent, being open, with us, making sure that they take advice from us if that's necessary, understanding where the gaps in their own knowledge is, such that we can help fill it from the experience we've had. All of these things have a certain respect to them. So I don't mean that I hope that doesn't come across in any way of like, the founders should sort of bow down to the VC. I mean it just more in there should be a mutual respect between both parties, rather than just kind of one way.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what our parents would have always said, are just good old fashioned values, being respectful, being humble, being yourself, being honest, being transparent. So it's trying to get this picture of the backable founder. Undergirding all that is the founder's ability to inspire and communicate a very simple vision. And I was listening to something at the weekend, and it cited the five levels of cognitive prowess that Einstein had pointed out, and he's smart is the first, then you've got intellect, then you've got brilliance, then you've got genius, and what actually transcends genius is simple. It's your mate Pete, who can take complex chemistry and explain it to mugs like me who have no chemistry background whatsoever, and explain these complex problems and inspire me and others like me to want to learn more. So that ability to inspire me around a vision for the future, which when we come to it solves a problem, and you can articulate the problem very, very clearly, specifically what you're actually solving for. Allied to that is the fact that you can then define what the addressable market is. So we're getting a picture here of kind of that interaction with that founder, that sense of there's something in that. Is there anything else? So you've engaged with the founder, they feel like they're a person you really want to work with. They've got all the traits and characteristics that your mum would have nodded to in terms of that person's got good manners. They're inspiring you with this vision for the future. They've clearly communicated and articulated a problem that they're going to solve. They've defined the addressable market. What else defines this all wrapped up in what is a good business and a good idea?
Oh, there's a lot. What else is there? Yeah, it's a good question. I think that and again, I separated two things. We talked about it earlier before I came on. Like, my wife is a brilliant chef, and she runs these high-end supper clubs. It's her. She caters. She does 10 courses with wine pairings in a beautiful setting, and they sell out. Sold out all years. Good luck getting a booking, sort of thing. And that is a brilliant business. And okay, I have had to back some of it by buying her pots and pans and stuff, or she's bought it with her own money, actually. But that isn't an investable business. I hate to say that; feels bad saying that. Sorry, darling. But because it's just her, it's not scalable. And so the other thing I'm looking for when you're thinking about investing is, okay, what's the scalability of this business? Is the funding going into building the foundations, or pouring more fuel on the fire in order to keep growing this business? So, and if it's a case of, well, actually, every time we do this, I'm going to have to put more money in and more money in and more money in, it just doesn't scale. And so you can have brilliant ideas. And what those like my wife's business, martina-out.com, sorry, just throwing out brilliant business, but it should stay where it is. It should stay special because of its uniqueness, because of its size. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that the world used to be full of entrepreneurs that just wanted to build these types of businesses, and then something happened along the way, and we all had to get bigger, and we all had to get faster, and we all had to get quicker, and we had to be on LinkedIn and all this sort of stuff. And now people forget that, and so what they do is they take business models which are great, and then they feel like they have to get funding into them, and they have to try and make them bigger and more special, and that's just not the case. So when I'm looking at backing a company, I'm saying, okay, well, is this right for funding? Or should they just do it organically? So, if you've got a great founder where you think culturally the right person, you think that they've got a very clear problem and solution that they can articulate straight away, the market size is big enough to make it interesting. I guess the fourth element really is then, is it scalable? Can they kind of keep growing it and growing and growing it? A lot of people would say, well, okay, as well, probably throw in competition, and can you protect the idea? Often overhyped, I guess, the protection, and like McDonald's wasn't the first burger, Pizza Hut wasn't the first pizza. and there's nothing stopping you open a burger restaurant. Like I think there's many ways of protecting ideas, but actually a lot of the time you find like just working hard, having the right values, doing the right thing. That's what gives you the secret sauce and the longevity.
Yeah, and I've seen it before where a passionate chef wants to express their passion by opening a restaurant or multiple restaurants. There's a distinct difference between cooking for your friends on a Saturday evening and them having a wonderful experience and actually opening multiple and running multiple restaurants. Very, very different. Yes, food is at the core, but completely different propositions and very different in terms of ultimately the lifestyle that you're going to inherit by virtue of embarking on both. So how do you discern between what is and what should stay a lifestyle business, which is an expression of the founders, like your wife Martina's passion, versus a truly scalable business, which is going to require the founder to change along the way, or maybe even be changed?
Yeah, and I think if you take the restaurant analogy to it's probably too far, but like there aren't that because we've got this celebrity chef culture, but really there's only about a dozen at most celebrity chefs that are able to open any sort of chain brand. By the time you get past Ramsay and you're like, well, who else is there? And well, they've all closed down, and Jamie Oliver messed up, didn't he? And it's really hard. So all the other hundreds of chefs are going to find it even more hard to open more than one or two restaurants. And again, that's because of the nature of it. So to answer your question, is sometimes it's just a judgment call. It's just like I get the feeling that, I don't think this is right. I think this would be better done organically. And I also think if I'm wrong, there's probably a jump between those two things. I think you'd be better off just doing this as a smaller, grow organically, build the foundations yourself. And then if a founder does scale, then hopefully they've been able to do that by not having to raise as much money, but doing it quite scrappy. Maybe they got a loan, maybe they had to get a friend to put money in, maybe they had to remortgage their house, maybe, somehow they got whatever the number is to get started. And then if they sort of start to prove it out that actually, look, I am able to scale this, I am actually able to replicate this, then at that point you might say, oh yeah, I got it wrong. I got loads wrong. My regret portfolio is way better than my actual portfolio. That's when anybody asks me for like advice on their business, I'm like, just to be clear, I'm the guy that thought Octopus Energy was a terrible idea and tried to convince Simon not to do it, which he happily reminded me in front of like the thousands of Octopus employees the other day, and time to move on.
You were enjoying too much of your wife's fine food and maybe some wine the evening before, I would suggest. But coming to the startup that ticks all of the boxes, you're ready to invest, you invest. What do you feel prevents the founder from moving from startup to becoming a successful scale up? And specifically, I'm thinking of the founder here, where you're saying everything looks right here, but the founder is potentially the impediment to scaling. Have you seen this, and what typically trips the founder up in moving from kind of startup to scale up?
I think it's a really good question. I think a lot about this, and I've had lots of conversations about it. It depends what stage you're talking about. Taking something from startup to scale up, because that might mean a different thing to you. I mean, I think of a startup as, I don't know, ideation stage, coming up with the idea, thinking about it, first revenues, and then you get to scale up, which has maybe got like £1 million, £2 million revenue. And actually, what stops a company getting from startup to scale up is not usually the founder base. At this point, it's still probably very founder centric. The founder can control a lot and should control a lot, because nobody's going to care as much about the business as the founder. And so actually from startup to scale up, the founder, if they're good, then that's then they should be able to do that. The actual problem comes next for me, and maybe this is what you're more referring to, which is where you get to like £1-2 million worth of revenue, and now you're trying to get to £10 million worth of revenue. Now the founder has a problem because the founder can't control everything anymore. Like, even if they want to control everything, it's really, really hard to, and they're not going to have the expertise to. And so they then have to start to put in trusted lieutenants. So you're going to go from a bookkeeper that helps you do the books to actually probably getting a CFO in. You're going to go from outsourcing your technology development to getting a chief technology officer in. And then the big one, the one that always kills founders, is generally the founder is the head of sales for a long time, even if they're not called the head of sales. The founder's the head of sales because they're going to walk through walls. They're going to use their contact book. They're going to call everybody they know. They're going to hassle people relentlessly to, they're not going to care about damaging their relationships with people because they care so much about this business that, they just want it to succeed more than anything else. But then they get to this sort of £2 million revenue point and they're still realizing that they're doing all the sales, that they're really the kind of chief revenue officer, and they've got to try and relinquish some of that control. Now that becomes really difficult because where with chief technology officer or financial officer or whatever, other people will have those expertise and will be better, like often for the founder are clearly better, unless you have a very technical founder or financially minded one. But generally founders tend to be more sales orientated in their nature. I don't have the percentages, but I believe most founders tend to be more sales orientated, and now they're going to have to relinquish control of that go-to-market strategy. And that is really, really hard. And what tends to happen is that the founder turns around and goes, right, I'm so busy now across all these different functions, across everything that I'm doing. I need to hire a head of sales or a chief revenue officer. And they go and they hire somebody that looks great on paper, the head of European sales for Oracle or whatever it might be. And that head of sales for Oracle comes in, and within 6 months, sales have plateaued or gone backwards. Even worse, the new head of sales has hired 4 other people or 5 other people to build their sales team. What's even worse about that is you're now burning shed loads of money. And so you're going back to the investors saying, hey, sales have slowed and we're burning shed loads of money as well. So can we have some more? Give us another 6 months and it will turn around. And it never does. What happens at this point is the founder then goes, this isn't working. The head of sales gets fired. You then fire all the other salespeople that were involved and comes back in, and then sales pick up again because the founder comes in, they're working through walls again, they don't care, they're working, etc. And it's like, and this merry-go-round just keeps on going. And I see this all the time. And the reason for that is when you put the head of sales in is that, it's not their business. So they're going to be a bit more careful with their contact book. They're not going to walk through, they're not going to run through walls. They might work hard, but they still want to play golf on a Saturday morning. And then you go down a stage and you see the younger salespeople, the junior salespeople, and like they're just told to sell stuff, and they're like, well, how do we sell? We don't know anything about selling, and so I'll make cold calls. Call all the directors of the FTSE 250 and try and you got somebody that's like 3 years out of university trying to call the CFO to sell some software to them. It's never going to happen. And so, how do you solve that? How do you solve that merry-go-round? Well, I think a bit contrarian again in terms of my view, which is actually the founder needs to stay much longer within the go-to-market section than, the idea is that what you would hear is like, oh, the founder needs to give people the responsibility and get out of the way. That's the thing to do. Yeah, maybe. But for me, maybe in certain aspects of it, but actually they probably don't. What they need to do is make sure that the machine is built. It's the founder's responsibility to say, right, I know that if I pour more money into marketing, I get more leads. I know what the leads convert at. I know how to convert how those leads convert. And I know the next stages. So they move from marketing qualified to sales qualified. And then I know what the conversion is. And so the founder really understands and owns that machine. But I see it very rarely. What tends to happen is they hand the building of the machine over down to this new head of sales and expect them to build the machine. And they're just too disconnected. They're not passionate enough about it, and it will take them too long to figure it out. And they get bopped on the head before they'd ever have time to. And so, yeah, that's the point.
This resonates so strongly, and I want to dig in a little bit further to see if there are other limitations or impediments to that scaling ambition, that scaling journey. And you're absolutely right, and I'm glad you clarified the question. It's once we're at that level of 1 or 2 million and we want to take it to 10, it's what typically trips the founder up. No one's going to be as passionate about selling your product or service as the founder themselves, and that resonates strongly. What I'm hearing is the founder really needs to develop a playbook and have a systemized playbook for generating leads, for nurturing those leads, for converting those leads that is not dependent on them, but certainly they should be the architect of, without putting words in your mouth, architect of what that playbook, what that system looks like. They should have their hands in the building of that before they kind of step back. But there is a requirement for them at some point to step back. So that resonates strongly. Edward, is there anything else? So, and what I'm hearing here is it becomes a little bit self-perpetuating as well, because the founder wants, and we all want, kind of validated or the ego rubbed in some way. So there's a sense of kind of the ego being validated whenever they're doing all the selling, and then they step back and they hire lots of people in and people aren't as effective as they are. So you get this paradox where they want to scale, but actually they know they've got to let go. But when they let go, essentially what they believe that they were great at selling is validated by the fact that this team that they've hired in cannot sell as effectively as they were. So they're brought back in again. What are some of the other tripwires for founders who really want to accelerate that scaling journey as you've seen it?
Yeah, I mean, I've written about various different points. I'm fascinated by this point in a company's life cycle, because there are so many ways you can get tripped up. And I'm going to upset a lot of people by saying this, but the other thing that then the founder does is it comes back in, starts to work a bit again, and then they're like, right, this time I'm going to hire a go-to-market consultant. And the go-to-market consultant comes in with their diagrams. Jesus, Google, just do this. Google search go-to-market diagram. There is thousands of them, and every single consultant's got their own version of the same thing. And it's actually not that difficult. That's all. Don't look at any of that. It's all about funnel. It's all about the funnel metrics. It's about the trip up is the fact that what the founder doesn't realize is that they need much, much more. And I'm talking very generally. Companies are different. There'll be specific companies will be like, well, my company's not like that. I get that. But in general, the bit that fails is that you need a lot more marketing qualified leads in order to hit your sales targets than you realize. And the trouble is that your person that does marketing is part-time and basically updates the website and does the 3 conferences a year that you go to, and does a bit of spam emailing. It's no, you need if you look at all the conversions through the funnel, you're going to need 10 times more marketing qualified leads in order to keep these salespeople hungry that are going to do it. And it's the top of the funnel that falls down quickly, just because there's not that. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is the fact I love a bit of self-promotion. I've just written a blog series about this. So I've written a blog series about losing product market fit. And losing product market fit for me is it always happens around sort of 2 to 10 million pounds worth of revenue, because what then happens that trips the founder up is you get all of these external factors. So first of all, you get your customers go from wanting to buy what you've provided to them to wanting you to build something for them. It's you sign up a big bank and they buy your license for $100,000 or whatever it is if it's technology, and then the next thing is, if you can develop those 3 modules, Brendan, just do those 3 modules, I'll pay you another 200,000. And then you get in there, and before you know it, you've got 10 of these customers all with their own bespoke modules, and you're like, okay, that's great, but you've got nothing you can scale now. You've lost product market fit because yes, you've got customer retention, but your vision is out the window. How you were going to scale it. So being really, really disciplined around following your vision and not allowing customers to drag you into the wrong direction and start building bespoke modules or going into different geographies. Or then you'll have you go to a dinner party and you're over a drink and somebody will say, oh yeah, I like your software, I could use that in my bank. And you're like, well, I do healthcare providers. And they're like, well, I'll just come do it for the bank. I'll pay you, however much. And before you know it, your vision of like being a great software product for healthcare is now being pulled apart by this bank over here. But they were going to pay you £300,000. So why wouldn't you do it? Really hard. And Mark Randolph, in his book, Mark Randolph, the founder of Netflix. In his book, he talks about this as the Canada problem. And what the Canada problem is that at one point Netflix had the chance to go into Canada, and it would increase revenues, they thought, by about 10%. And they chose not to do it. And the reason why they chose not to do it is because there's the French language, there's different regulations, the different postage. They could do it all, it'd become profitable, but they were like, it would distract us from our vision, our core vision, which is subscription DVDs through the post in the US. That was their vision. Stick to that, because every minute we spend developing a Canadian business is a minute we're not spending on the US developing the scalable part of the business and not being sidetracked by things. And they did that time and time again. So through his book, he talks about, every time he talks about like, we thought about like having physical locations in supermarkets where you could swap in DVDs and return them. And it was really popular when we tried it out. But the Canada problem says that it was the wrong thing to do. And obviously Netflix went on to define what it means to have a B2C subscription business because of that. And I think there are so many macro factors, and again, the block theory touches on all of them. But there's so many macro factors coming down on founders at this point because they're being successful all of a sudden. So everybody wants a bit of the journey as well. That they just get dragged out, and before they know it, they build a Frankenstein of tech. The company becomes a Frankenstein, and it loses its scalability.
We'll put a link to your wonderful blog posts in the show notes, Edward, because I'm fascinated by this also. So be focused on building out a system, a machine, which actually really cultivates a healthy leads funnel, and understand that actually it's going to take 10 times more in terms of lead generation than you expect whenever you've been kind of knocking the doors and you've been getting an ear. You're going to get an ear much quicker than somebody who's half your age and has just graduated from university knocking the same door. So it's understanding that certainly you will sell your product better than anyone else, but you've got to build the machine to be able to do that, to be as effective without you in it. I love that advice in terms of really staying true to your vision. Be really careful of getting distracted by the opportunity to augment or add on or pivot. And I feel the wonderful thing about having a clear vision of the future and being able to articulate that in a simple way, it not only informs what you should do, but importantly, and what I'm hearing from you, Edward, is it should inform what you shouldn't do. So great advice. What else in this journey from 2 to 10 and beyond potentially can trip up the founder?
Yeah, just double down on this. I mean, sort of touches on both the question as well. I mean, there's effectively 3 elements to keeping product market fit and allowing you to grow to 2 to 10 and beyond. And that is number one is having a very clear vision, as we've talked about. If you don't have a clear vision of your business, what you're going to end up with is a loss of communication. So, if different departments, I've seen this, if one department thinks you're doing this and the other department thinks you're doing that, and what often happens is that the communication channels move from the center into the sales team, and the sales team are telling everybody what the vision of the business is. It's like, and what do I mean by that? Go back to our healthcare versus banking background. If you were the founder and you had that vision of being a healthcare provider, and then all of a sudden the sales team win a bank and you allow them to do that, what does that say to the tech teams? What does it say to the customer services team, the marketing? Like what all the communications gone completely haywire now because we don't know what we are. We don't know who we're trying to serve. And then communication breaks down. So that's why vision is really important. Obviously you can't build a business without customer engagement. And so but that's the dangerous one, obviously, as we've talked about. And that happens a lot in software because what ends up happening, you get the customer engagement, but then you build for the customer, not for your vision. And you end up more like a consulting company. So vision, customer engagement, and then finally is that scalability play. So all the time, if you're a founder and you think, right, have I got my vision? Have I got my customer engagement? And have I got my scalability? If you keep those three things in place, most of the time you're going to be all right, because then it's just about putting the right resources into the right places in order to take advantage of those three pillars. It gets harder. What I would say is it gets harder at sort of 10 million and then upwards, because you do start to, it depends what market you're in, but quite often at about 10 million, you start to lose the white space in the market that you're into. You start to either butt up against a lot of competition, or you start to exhaust the niche that you were able to kind of really focus on and then control. And, when you're trying to then build from 10 million onwards, what I think about then is like, okay, and for some businesses, it's not 10 million. Some people will have their niche focused all the way up to 200 million. That's great if you can do. But at 10 million, often that is when things start to get a bit harder. And then I like to think of rather than think of the idea of pivot, I like to think of this idea of tilt. I don't know if I read it anywhere. I think I accidentally came up with it, and maybe one day it'll be in a business book, and I'll get like a credit for it or something. That's what I hope.
I hope it's an acronym. It's got to be an acronym.
No, part of being a dyslexic is that you get you get words muddled up all the time. And I thought tilt, and I was talking about pivot, but I called it tilt instead, which is like, again, my friend Pete was laughing at me because there's this hill in San Francisco called, I think I can't even remember, it's called Hawk Hill. But I'd always call it like Falcon Point or Eagle's Nest or whatever. Anyway, complete digression. My point is, one day whilst I was thinking about pivot, I said tilt instead, and then I started to define what I meant by tilt. Either that or I read it somewhere and I'm just plagiarizing accidentally. And the idea of tilt is not like a pivot. It's about trying to expand your market without losing what's true to the business. And some businesses that's really easy, and some businesses that's really hard. So, if you take an Amazon, when Amazon was an online bookseller, it did online books. It was really good at it. It controlled that niche, and then at some point it went, how much harder is it going to be for us to sell CDs? Not that much harder. We're not really losing our identity by doing CDs. That's not a pivot. That's a tilt. We're just tilting into other markets, or it might be another geography. You might be like, right, okay, we're in the UK, we're going to tilt into Australia. Often you get Australian companies, for example, that say, right, we've built this business in Australia. My good friends down in Australia, like Tribe, who help companies do this. Tribe will say, right, you've built in Australia, now it's time to tilt slightly, not pivot, tilt, and then open up the UK market as well, and they'll come and help you do that. And so you're trying to think of things. You're trying to think of ways of expanding that market without sort of damaging it. And some, as I said, there was one business that I absolutely loved. It was a brilliant business. What it did is you put all the phone data into their special Swizzy computer, and it told you where all the bad guys were. How cool is that? You put loads of data in it. It tells you like where the bad guys are, who they've been calling, all this sort of stuff. And this like really clever technology. And they were like pretty much in every single police force in the UK and looking for investment. And I'm like, yeah, but where do you go from there? It's like private detectives. Where's their tilt? Their tilt is, there is no, I mean, do you know what I mean? That business is almost impossible to tilt because how specific a case it's solving, despite how cool the technology is. And so I think that for a founder, it's when it gets to about 10 million, and probably just before they should start be thinking about, okay, well, what do we tilt into that doesn't destroy the vision of what we've got?
Yeah, I really like that. I love the clarity, and I'm glad we dived into this. We've got the kind of three critical aspects of ensuring you stay on track to scale from 2 to 10, 10 and 10 beyond, and that's staying true to your vision, ensuring that whatever you're doing from a customer engagement perspective is repeatable, sustainable, and scalable. And coming to the third point in terms of using that word scalable, what we're referring to here is a business model that creates the foundation for you to be able to tilt, I love that word, tilt into other regions, other geographic regions, or tilting into other sectors. So you use the Amazon example there. I really, really like that. That's given our listeners great clarity on that, Edward. Something I want to come to, so I'm going to pivot for a moment. You guys are very much focused on investing in technology, in ideas, in startups who are serving, who have truly aspirations to scale with purpose, serving people or planet or both. Can you share with our listeners what you see as the key problems out there that need solutions, and what role business can play in this?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of, I think there's lots of places that businesses can play in it, but there's also lots of problems to solve where, the world's on I don't mean to be too melodramatic, but I feel like the world's on a bit of a knife edge at the moment, between climate change, poverty. We're getting, there's less democracies right now. We're getting more polarization that's going on. And I think business has obviously a huge role to play in climate change. And you've seen with Octopus Energy's platform Kraken, that is having a massive positive impact. It's not going to be government. Governments can kind of kickstart these things, but it's going to have to be business that takes it up. And what I would say is that I think if you have a business that can combine trying to have that vision and purpose of improving the world, like Octopus Energy, but doing it in such a way that's customer centric, but also makes business sense, you can see how it can revolutionize the industry and be extremely successful. I remember when people first talked about like how you were going to plug in your electric car, and then your car battery was going to then help to balance your home when the wind wasn't blowing. It just all sounded like a pipe dream, and Octopus is doing that. The Octopus Energy team are actually doing that. So I think there's a combination there. I think there's other big problems we've got right now. I think where business is going to have to come in, and maybe slightly controversially, as I'm a school governor, but business I think is going to have to come into the educational space, because the way we teach education is pretty much exactly how it's been since the Victorian times. Teacher stands up. I cannot believe that my kids still learn multiplication tables up to 12 by heart. They spend so much time on it. Completely waste of time. Understanding what multiplication is and how to use it, brilliant. But parafashioning multiplication tables, are you kidding me? We've got like calculator. Everyone's got a calculator in their pocket. And more point, we're going to use AI anyway. And I think that business has got a huge role in ensuring that the next generation of young people are going to come through and actually be able to use these technologies and harness these technologies to for good, to make them to have real purpose. So there's just a ton of stuff. We need to solve the fact that we can't just keep this whole idea of growth at all costs and continue growing. We're just absorbing all the world's resources at such a rate, and it's not fair to look around at developing world and say, well, you've got to solve it for you, because we're going to have to try and do that. We're going to have to try and back businesses that do that.
Yeah, I came across this quote some time ago, and I've used it a lot since, because it just resonates so strongly, from Edward Abbey, he's passed now, but the environmental activist, who said, "Growth for growth's sake is the ideology of a cancer cell." And that's really struck me, because it speaks to what we're doing in Simple Scaling, which is inspiring, connecting, enabling ambitious leaders of SMEs to scale with purpose. And if you think that you have to go out and hug trees and kind of miss the opportunity to make profit as a result, actually you're missing a fundamental opportunity here. I had Mark Ahoik, the authority on the United Nations SDGs, way back in season 1, quite a number of years ago. Marga has since spoken on her program. She wrote a book called The $1 Trillion Shift, and she says essentially, by seeking to solve the issues underlying the 17 UN SDGs, there is a $12 trillion opportunity for businesses out there, and I feel you guys are playing right at the heart of that in supporting those businesses who who have the vision, a purposeful vision to solve some of the world's most pressing challenges right now. Before we move into the close, you've mentioned it a couple of times. You're an incredible exemplar of someone who is leading as a neurodivergent in a neurotypical world. I had the wonderful pleasure of interviewing Jamie Waller for his new book, The Dyslexic Edge, and it was Jamie who actually made the introduction, Edward, and I love what you're doing, and the fact that you're investing in companies who are supporting dyslexic learners on a personal basis shows how important this is to you. What can we do as company leaders and as those SME leaders listening today? What can we do to leverage and harness the incredible talent and the incredible way that neurodivergent people think within our teams? How do we make our companies, our teams, a better place to unlock the potential of neurodivergent thinkers?
Yeah, it's a question that I'm actually asked quite a lot, and one that in some ways I've got an answer which I'll give you, but in some ways I over time I've struggled to think about, because sort of like putting people into buckets of like there's these neurotypical people, neurodivergent people, but the truth is we're all different. Everybody has a different way of working. Everyone has a different mind, and actually, what's probably good for neurodivergent people is good for neurotypical people, and treating people as individuals first and foremost, and trying to understand what they're good at and where they can add value, regardless of where they fit in a screening test or whatever it might be, is probably good for all businesses and all people, and make nice places to work. It's a bit like the education problem. I think historically people and humans have tried to categorize people into types rather than trying to figure out what people are good at, and then really embrace that and use those qualities. I'll go back to my wife, and phenomenal chef, but she's terrible with a spreadsheet. So what's the old quote? It's like, if you judge a fish by how well it climbs a tree, you're always going to be disappointed. So you've got to try and figure out what people are good at. And so how do you do that, I guess? And that's the real question, away from the neurotypical, neurodivergent. And I think that's just being really open to being vulnerable within the business itself, and being very open. So this is my whole dyslexia journey, and I feel like people like Jamie Waller and Jamie Wace and many other sort of leading dyslexic entrepreneurs and all the rest are doing way more than me. So I'm definitely not going to give any sort of credit for sort of helping the dyslexic community. I am merely somebody that writes their blog on it, compared to what they're doing, which is Jamie is really changing the way people think about dyslexia, which is all testament to him. Fantastic person. But where my journey with dyslexia and transparency happened is I wrote a blog called The Dyslexic Investor, which actually I wrote about the fact that I just got my master's from Side Business School, which is part of Oxford University. And I think I put a quote which is like, "I just got my master's at Oxford, not bad for a dyslexic." And then loads of people wrote to me and was like, "Wow, this is so cool. Like, my kids are really struggling. It's given me, hope that they might be okay." And I'm like, shit, didn't really mean that to happen. And then, one train ride in, must have been quiet, I wrote an entire blog, this whole blog. And then the chief executive, Simon Rodgson, picked it up, and he made a big, he said, well, he posted it to the whole company, and then the company all got, for a minute I was trending. That's all I'm going to say. For a minute on LinkedIn, I was trending, and then COVID happened. And, some people, obviously it was tragic, but it was even more tragic because my blog stopped trending. But the blog then kind of, led on to me having more conversations with people. But that itself then led to the openness of people within Octopus saying, well, actually, I'm dyslexic too, or I've got ADHD, or, I've got autism, or whatever it might be. And then Octopus supported us to come together as a group and have both kind of an informal setting, but also more formal changes. So no, what have we done? Because that group was encouraged to get together and talk about how things would be better, we've put sort of neurodiversity into the manager training. So, managers are now told, okay, well, if you've got somebody with these different neurodiverse conditions, then you more identify and being identified with different neurodiverse aspects, then you might want to do this, or you might want to do that, or you might think about this. But it all came down to you want to sit down with them, have a conversation, understand what they're comfortable with, what they're not comfortable with, what sort of projects work for them, which they don't, and their ways of working. If you want to, I had one boss, for example, say to me, you really need to write your emails and then check them before you send them. And I'm like, I have checked this email for 2 minutes before it's been sent. I just can't spot things in the way that the normal person can. So if you're expecting every single email to come from me clean, it's probably not going to. And actually that boss was great, because that boss then turned around and said, look, if you've got anything important, send it to me first. I'll check it, blah, blah, blah. Even better now, because you can just run it through AI and do it for you. So, a lot of this, which is just a great example of whereas a lot of these skills of being super accurate with grammar was really important 5 years ago, is just irrelevant now as a skill. And which enables neurodivergent people to have an even bigger place in the workplace. So, yeah, that's the long answer. Is if I was encouraging a company, if it's small, it's just talking to individuals, it's understanding what you can do. If it's a bigger company like Octopus, then it's maybe trying to get a group of people together. And I said we changed everything from manager training to the way in which we did selection and recruitment, but also just people sharing their stories about what they find easy and what they find hard.
I love that. My daughter is neurodivergent. She's high functioning autism, and I've just seen firsthand when she's found the thing that she excels at, that incredible energy that she has is just channeled for the good. And it's wonderful to watch her journey and be part of her journey. I'm very, very privileged to be part of her journey, and she's certainly helped me in seeing the world in a different way, which is always a good thing. But what I'm hearing, back to the third principle of our 10 principle ScaleX framework, which is people. You don't build a business, you build people, and people build a business. In order to build those people, you've got to first understand the human. What really excites this person, what bores them, where their strengths lie, what parts of the business would they like to get involved with, where can they excel. We talk about having the right jockeys, which are those people who exemplify your values, on the right horse, so they're actually in the right role, running the right race. Back to the scalability, the business model again. Are they in the right sector, or are they in the right region in order to really excel? So I love the fact it's just going back to really taking time to understand the person and truly wanting to understand them. And
I do think I just sort of pick up on, as we said, a company is just a collection of people. So I'm very big on this. One of the things that, coming right full circle to where we started, one of the things that used to really bugged me about Rolls-Royce was that they would constantly, people would say oh, this is just the way it's done at Rolls-Royce. This is just how Rolls-Royce do it. And I'm like, you do realize that we are Rolls-Royce. We are the people within this company. So what you're really saying is, well, this is how Rolls-Royce do it, is that this is how we as a collection of people have decided to operate. This is how we've decided to behave. But for some reason, they sort of saw Rolls-Royce as its own individual that was harsh or unfair or inefficient, but no, you're inefficient. We're inefficient. That's the truth. And I think that culture, yes, you can get the right people, right place, but I actually think that culture of transparency and openness comes from the top. And I've seen this. Sometimes when people talk about culture, it feels a bit wishy-washy and it feels a bit. But trust me, if you have a CEO and a leadership team that treat the external world like they're the best and everyone else is a loser, and we're here to trample on everybody else and be, and all the rest of it, then do you know what? Every employee is going to start to act like that. They're all going to follow the leader. Humans are pretty simple creatures. If you've got, we have this kind of thing at Octopus, whereas if you do something that really benefits the customer, that an example would be like Octopus Energy, when they were the first to give out electric blankets to people when they were cold for free to help their customers. Stuff like that. It's just within the DNA of the business. It's just to think about helping customers that might be more vulnerable, or there was one sales guy. There was a brochure, and unfortunately the customer was blind or was going blind, and so he went home and he read the entire brochure onto a CD and sent them the CD so that the person could read the brochure. Like stuff like that is within the DNA of this business. Compare that to British Airways. Like the DNA of British Airways is we're the British Airways. We're really arrogant. We don't really care about our customers. It's all about outsourcing and efficiency as much as we can, and everyone will keep using us because we're British Airways. That to me is British Airways as brand, and that again to me starts from the top. So I think you can have the right people in the right places, but if you don't have the person at the top demanding the right culture, then I think you'll still lose.
Yeah, and I love the fact you've called it out. It's their 10th principle. It's the keystone principle, which holds the other 9 principles together, which is positive growth culture. And something that I wrote about recently on LinkedIn was the little acronym CAM, which I learned as a result of kind of picking up lots of parenting books whenever Anya was younger, to try and really understand how to create an environment which was going to support her and the other kids in being the best that they can be. And the acronym was CAM, and it stands for communicate, advise, listen, and model. Modeling being the most impactful, and that goes for what we see in business as well. And I have to say, Edward, you model wonderfully. I have thoroughly enjoyed the last hour. You're an incredible exemplar of someone who is at the top of their game, who is doing it authentically, doing it humbly, doing it intelligently, and doing it for something that is much bigger than yourself. So I tip my hat to you, sir. It's wonderful to watch what you're doing, and I wish you every success and continued success on that journey. Tell me, what is next for you? So you've been blogging away. We'll get some links to that. Is there a book in the offing? Is there what's next for you?
Not in this century. No, not in this century. I'll leave that to Jamie. He can do that. I don't know. I spent most of my 20s and 30s kind of like thinking forward 10 years and like what was going to happen next. And so I'm trying to be more in the present these days. I've got 3 beautiful children, beautiful wife. I just try and enjoy it. And I work for a fantastic company. I've got wonderful colleagues. I'm like, and I get to meet entrepreneurs all day and sit on their boards and invest money into them and try and make them grow with purpose. And you know what? If somebody had said, I like this experiment, which is like go back 20 years, and if somebody said to me, you're going to be married to Martine, you have 3 beautiful kids, you'll have a great. I'd be like, I will take that. So don't, So what's next? I don't know. Who knows?
Brilliant. Well, look, if people want to find out more about you and your work and the work at Octopus, Edward, where best to reach you?
I'm super active on LinkedIn, and regularly blog and post and basically do what I do here, which is ramble too much and go off in all sorts of directions. So yeah, feel free to connect on LinkedIn.
Oh, lovely. Well, look, once again, thank you for sharing your time, your wonderful energy with me today. So much incredible wisdom in everything you share. I have a closing tradition, given the incredible experiences that you have experienced on this planet to date. Can you share with our listeners 3 timeless takeaways?
Oh, 3 timeless takeaways. It's a great question. I think I've kind of kicked myself in the foot, which is I've given one already, which would definitely be to try and live in the present as much as you can, and be grateful for where you found yourself. My second one, and this is quite deep. I think that we're in a world where people spend a lot of time feeling judged and feeling like comparing themselves to other people and all this sort of thing. I always think, look at your best mates. This is my views. Look at my best mates, and I think my best mates are the best people in the world. And so, like the only people I actually have to compare myself to, or the only people I have to answer to, are them. And if they're my friends, you know what? Then I'm doing all right because, they're awesome. And The final thing I'd say is it's always kind of better to do things. I'm going to go back to Pete. Pete, I lived with in San Francisco when I was out there for a year or so, and he wrote me a letter, and he said the last thing he said was, whatever you do from here on in, climb the mountains, jump in the waterfalls, all the rest of it. And I think that's probably good advice. Always climb the mountain if it's there to be climbed.
I love that. I look forward to meeting Pete hopefully someday. He sounds like a wonderful guy, a guy that we can learn a lot from. Edward, once again, thank you for spending and sharing your time with me today. I wish you every success. Take care.
Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.